Welcome to Dr. Rebecca's Let's Talk Horses. May the force of the horse be with you podcast show, hosted by Dr. Rebecca Wara-Goss. In this podcast, we discuss all things horse-related, especially in mental health, research, human-animal bond, and the helping industries nationally and internationally, and explore the phenomenon of the horse-human connection.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Rebecca with Let's Talk Horses. May the force of the horse be with you. Today, my guest is Dr. Blair McKissock. Welcome, Dr. McKissock.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Welcome. Dr. McKissock has her Ph.D. in Applied EcoPsychology from Akamai University in Hawaii. She began as a recreational therapist 25 years ago, specializing in adventure therapy and animal-assisted therapy and mental health. Equine-assisted learning quickly became her preferred intervention. She earned certifications as a Certified Therapeutic Riding Instructor and Equine Specialist, while training with many specialists in the field of equine-assisted services. In addition to her PhD, she holds a Master's in Education and is very interested in studying the impact of the equine-assisted work on those with trauma. Also, she holds certifications as a yoga teacher, trainer, wellness coach, and a trauma specialist that all contribute to her practice and breath, body, brain. Blair currently serves as the Director of Education at Strides for Success, where she partners with Debbie Anderson to provide consulting, professional education workshops, online courses, and resources in equine-assisted learning and therapeutic riding. In addition, she has been published in peer-reviewed publications and textbooks supporting the efficacy of equine-assisted work as a mainstream intervention option for learning and therapy. She is a passionate international speaker and advocate for the benefits of the human connection with nature, specifically equine interaction. She is very active with PATH International, supporting the development of professional competencies and educational opportunities in equine-assisted learning. I am so thrilled to have Dr. McKissock here today, and I thoroughly enjoyed her conference presentation that she did with the Equine Psychotherapy Institute, the Nourished online conference, and her presentation had been on the biopsychosocial impacts of connection. Welcome, Dr. McKissock. How are you doing today?
Doing good. I just have to laugh because that's a mouthful. Biopsychology.
Thank you. I try to make sure I was pronouncing things carefully, make sure that it was well understood of all the amazing things that you do and have done.
And it's funny too, because I've seen that word extended and like a bunch of other words strung together, because then, especially in the animal assisted or nature connected work, there's like no one word that describes all of the different parts and facets of the human animal or human nature connection. So I think we're all still trying to make it up.
Absolutely.
Make up something that works.
Yes. Can you share a little bit about yourself, your background, and what drew you to the profession and the areas that you work in today?
So I'm going to try and make it brief, because you did such a good job just kind of explaining my convoluted background. But, I was super lucky as a kid. I grew up working a lot with my mom, and she was on the board of the Indianapolis Zoo here in town. And so I got to start working with animals at the zoo when I was really young, at the age of 12. So I got experience with primates and elephants and birds of prey. And it kind of changed like the whole trajectory of my life. And I was going to be a vet, and that's all there was. I also was involved, and this is going to sound so nerdy. I am a total closet nerd, but I was in the Young Scientists Club. And
I love it.
in partnership with Eli Lilly. And so I got to do an internship in high school, studying animal behavior, which was pretty amazing. And work in a lab and study mice and behavior. And then I also did visitation, taking animals. At the time, she was also the executive director of the Humane Society. So I spent a lot of time there after school taking care of animals, and I think I've been shoving poop longer than I've done pretty much anything else. I also started riding at a really young age, and so horses were a big part of my life growing up. But like I said, I wanted to be a vet, and there was nothing else, that was it. I soon learned that I had a head more for psychology than I did anything math related. So passing a pharmacology class was probably never going to happen.
Yeah,
And
those
and
are
I think,
challenging.
well, and I think there's a lot of horse people that are like that. We're very kinetic. We're very curious. We are very observant. I think that comes from being around horses so much. Um, but I wanted to really examine every aspect of this connection. And I think part of it is because we are so disconnected from the natural world. But pets and animals enrich our lives in such an amazing way. So I took every opportunity that I could to learn. In college, I found recreation therapy. At the time, occupational therapy didn't know what to do with it. And, they were like, not sure this is a good fit. So recreation therapy, they're like, hey, come on in, let's try, let's see what can happen. So I got to do um, an internship in dolphin assisted therapy for my clinicals, as well as an internship at Oregon State Hospital working in forensics in the adventure therapy and experiential ed units. And I think what I began to really understand is that it's all the same. It's all connected. You can draw from so many different areas. Um, and we really haven't quite figured it all out. So we're still exploring. As a practitioner, I've always been on the fringes of mental health, meaning I'm not a licensed counselor, but as a recreation therapist, I can do group work in a clinical setting. I can work in psych. And it really was still kind of hard to find a place. And I know a lot of people too can probably relate to that in equine assisted learning. If they're not a mental health professional, it's kind of like, well, where do I fit, and where do I get my education? Where do I get my credentialing? So I kind of just followed where life took me. Life took me to Purdue, which was an amazing experience working with Dr. Beck and the Institute for Human Animal Interaction, Human Animal Bond. And my work there was more related to education and how animals can impact kids in the classroom and kids academically. So I studied literacy and the Blackstein Literacy Project for about 3 years, which was an amazing experience. And to really see firsthand how much of an impact um, the horses can be, and made this connection between the work with the dolphins and the horses, was that the dolphins were really part of the motivation. Interact with them was motivating. And so they would really put forth a lot of effort in their rehab goals on the deck so that they could interact with the dolphin. And there was something really similar with that as it related to the horses. The kids wanted to reach out and touch. They wanted to interact with that mini horse that we brought into the school, and it captured their attention. And half the time engaging kids or engaging people in the process is half the battle. So if you can capture their attention and generate curiosity, you've opened up the door to bring them into the process. And for a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, therapy either hasn't worked for them, just the traditional talk therapy, right? Or for some of them, they've been so much a part of the system that it is no longer effective. It's almost like they become burned out on it a little bit. And so I think there's a really nice partnership for people who do equine assisted learning, that they can engage people back in the process and they can get them going again, so that maybe they'll re-enter the counseling, re-enter intensive psychotherapy, and be able to engage with it again. So I found the horses and the animals to be so motivating. So that was a really interesting thing. Also got into coaching and positive psychology because I thought, wow, here's a really great avenue for helping people through the process of change but doing it in a way that is on the learning side of things. We're not counseling. We're not trying to process past emotion. We can still support the change process. And through coaching methodology and coaching psychology and positive psychology. So anyway, I went that direction of wellness coaching. And I've been in therapeutic riding. I think the minute I stepped out of college, I got certified to do therapeutic riding. And, let's be honest, sometimes it's not always easy to make a living doing this work. So it's always been there. Sometimes I've been full-time with another part-time job doing coaching. I even worked as an implementation consultant for a health information technology company. that was an interesting diversion, but
wow.
I know, right?
That helped make money.
Well,
Bringing in the bacon.
It was experiential. It was leadership training. And I'm like, again, it fits with that skill set of coaching. And it was funny because every time I couldn't get my point across, the only thing I kept thinking was, if I only had a horse right now, I could show you what it is that I'm trying to, the point that I'm trying to make, or, you could really dig into what you need to work on. So I think that it's so multifaceted. And I think that I feel like my really eclectic background was such an asset. In later on too, I was working as a co-director at a therapeutic riding facility, and we had this amazing grant. And the grant, we didn't use all the money. And so we went back to the grantors and said, hey, can we use this money to go and get trained by some different people? And so I was really, felt really, really good to be able to go, and I got to spend time with Ariana Strozzi out in California.
Oh, wonderful.
Did some work with one of the Equine-assisted instructors, did some work with Adventures in Awareness, did some work with EFMA, or sorry, not EFMA, EGALA. And, being able to kind of look at it again from all different directions. And this was back in early 2000s. And so we really, again, we're still in the infancy of this field. So, and again, that's a kind of an interesting perspective to look back when it was still, we're all still trying to figure it out. And now there's so many people who are out there doing training that, I would have loved to spend time with during that. But it was such a gift because it really changed my perspective. I loved therapeutic riding. I loved working with the kids with disabilities.
And that was a PATH International?
That was a PATH International certification. And I was working for a center called Agape, which is here in Indy. It was really interesting to, again, just think about how we interact with the horses, and are there different ways? And I started to make the connections with the outdoor adventure stuff, the experiential ed, the coaching, and it's like, that's EAL. And Debbie Anderson, I knew her from Agape many years ago. And at the time I was working at that health information technology company, and I called her and I'm like, get me out of a cubicle. I can't do this anymore. Get me out. I need to come work with you. We need to
come outside, get dirty.
So anyway, that's kind of a roundabout description. And, yes, I was looking for a place to do my PhD. I wanted to keep continuing. I had a really hard time finding a program that would take me, because I wasn't quite counseling, wasn't quite education, wasn't quite, if I did recreation therapy, there weren't other people to mentor, to be able to work with. And so I ended up finding Akamai, and I loved it. It was a totally different experience. Purdue and IU, where I did my undergrad and my master's, were a lot more hardcore science and very, following the process. Whereas Akamai was a lot more like, let's just be curious and let's see what happens.
Absolutely.
Which I thought I was like, oh, okay, this is
And that's what you needed, right?
Yeah.
Because you were developing a niche from all of these different areas from your experience. And there wasn't already an established program that would fit into that box, right? And so it sounds like this university allowed you to have that freedom of exploration to do the work that you were trying to discover.
Yeah, and I think
and write about.
there's something to be said just about original science. Science that is exploratory and isn't following the rules necessarily. There's something to be said for that, especially in an industry where we don't have a lot um, of theoretical foundations and that structure yet. So anyway, I don't want to talk more about myself because the longer I talk about myself, the less people want to hear. So I would love to just kind of shift gears a little bit.
Sure, absolutely.
And let you kind of take the wheel and ask some questions, and let's see if we can help fill the gaps for some of your listeners in this industry with lots of directions, right?
Yeah, and so I think that the first thing I would love to know if you can help describe for our listeners, especially those who are not familiar with EAL or equine assisted learning. And you did mention that quite a lot of what you have done in your experience in training and instruction has been a plethora of different things that could mean EAL. But are you able to help describe what equine assisted learning is?
Mm-hmm. So one of the projects that Debbie and I worked on for many years was to establish a definition and some guidelines for EAL. And we did that through PATH International, about 12 years ago. And we spent almost a year trying to figure out how to define what equine assisted learning is and do it in a way that wasn't exclusionary. Because a lot of times the definitions want to tell you, here's the box that we're going to put everybody in. And if you don't fit inside that box, well, then you are not a part of this. And that's not what we wanted. We wanted something that would instead say, you know what, this is for everybody. But this is what it is. Again, it kind of seems nebulous. There's equine facilitated, there's equine assisted, there's I think equine wellness, and it got really confusing for people to figure out where to go. And we were seeing that all over the place, which is one of the reasons why we started horsework at Strides to Success, was to help people find that pathway, because it's not easy if you're not, if you're not in mental health. So we came up with wanting to do equine assisted. We did surveys within PATH, outside of PATH, and we did surveys all over the world of all the different other organizations like Greece and Italy and France. And they were awesome to be able to send these surveys out and ask people what it is you call it. Because first of all, we wanted an inclusive definition that took into consideration research. Because when you're trying to do research and you do searches, like in the ERIC index and all those other search engines, if you don't put in the right word, the right terms, your research doesn't pull up. So if you're searching for equine assisted and somebody called theirs facilitated, then it's like twice as much work to try and find it. So we wanted to stick with the one that was being used the most. So we actually did some search engine research with Google to try and figure that out. And assisted by far was like 5-1 compared to facilitated. What people were calling it in their websites, what people were calling it in research. And I think it's also broader than the word facilitated in how you practice your work. Because a lot of people would say, well, it's facilitated by the horse, so we want to call it equine facilitated. Others would say, well, it's really facilitated by the human who's helping to facilitate the relationship. So equine assisted also was more in line with animal assisted, which again, we're part of that industry. We're part of the animal assisted industry. We're part of the nature assisted industry. So it was more in line. So the definition that we came up with, and pardon me, I'm going to look over on my screen so I can read it. But equine assisted learning is an experiential learning approach. So we also wanted to say, look, this is the big deal about it. And it's part of our theoretical foundations that this is experiential, because that is what promotes that transfer of learning. What you learn in the barn will hopefully translate into real life, right? It promotes the development of life skills applicable to educational, professional, and personal goals through equine-assisted activities. Now, we identified that there were three main areas that people were working in. They were working in either like academics, working with school groups, working with school age kids, working on kind of that age bracket. So we call those educational. So that's a branch over here. The other branch that we looked at was the personal growth area. So this is coaching. This is a lot of the spiritual and religion based. I don't want to say religion, faith based is the word I'm looking for. Faith based work. It kind of fits into that personal growth, right? And all that 9 dimensions of wellness. And then we have the professional, because that's the corporate work. E3A was another group that I'd done some training with. They're awesome, and that's their niche, is that corporate work. I think there's a couple of others out there that focus on that, but that's again a very different skill set to work in leadership development, organizational development. So we wanted to make sure that those three areas got in there. So again, we're calling it experiential. We're defining the fact that this is not about processing emotion or trauma. This is about helping people accomplish personal goals, educational goals, or professional goals. Again, the other way that we define it is, if you think counselors process the past, that they're there to process those past emotions, whereas coaching or the learning aspect is about from the present moment forward. Hopefully you've done the work that you needed to do. Okay, now what skills can I teach you to, help you move forward in your life? So if you kind of think of the continuum that way, and not that counselors don't help with the present forward, it's just a good delineation between that line, so that with coaching, they know where their scope of practice is and where that line is. If that makes sense.
It does. And so, what areas of equine assisted learning now are you working on or working towards as a professional?
So one of the things that I'm really interested in now, and a lot of people are, is the idea of the biohacking and the heart rate variability work and vagus nerve or vagal toning. So what I find really interesting is that when you're working with a horse, there's an emotional aspect to it, right? Especially for people who've never worked with a horse. And they all of a sudden find themselves to be in a position of vulnerability, which does bring things up. And there's also a physical part of it, which also impacts that social part of it. So if you think about it, the emotional part's what's happening on the inside emotionally, the physical part's what's happening on the inside emotionally, and then there's the relational part that's happening, that dynamic between the horse, the human, and between the horse and the facilitator, and the facilitator and the client. So, but yeah, but I don't know if that describes it.
Yeah, and so you're interested. Yeah, so it sounds like you're interested in the combination of understanding, kind of, I guess, from a more scientific, technical standpoint of the next steps for EAL is working within the sciences of understanding, I guess, the physical, emotional connection that a human being may have with a horse, and vice versa, and then the impact that has on someone's development, right, and whatever their personal goals are. Hopefully I described that right, but that sounds like that's something you're interested in and you're working towards and including in your work.
That was an amazing summary, and you stayed on track.
Yeah, I had my coffee this morning, so that helped.
Right? I'm not sure. I
got my second cup right here too, just in case.
There's real science that's happening, and I think we're at a place in our field that we need to start putting a framework around it, and not because we need to put it in a box, but we need to be able to communicate what's going on to the general public. Congress, decided that what was happening with the veterans was good enough to allocate money towards the veterans work. But at the same time, there was no structure around, okay, who does it? What's it called? What should it look like? What should the program look like? So there's no protocols, and there's no framework. And I think we just need to have that so that when we can communicate to the consumer what they're getting into and what might happen, and communicate to the caregivers of the consumers, our referral networks. So where our clients are coming from, if we're working with hospitals or the VA or schools or whatever it might be, and then just to the general public and to our donors, if you're a nonprofit and you rely on donors. So we need to start being able to frame and articulate what's actually happening in the human body. So another aspect that I'm really interested in is the idea of social genomics, that when we interact with the horse, it actually has the potential to turn on and off our genes.
Wow.
We know that environment impacts our DNA. We know that under stressful situations, it can turn on what they call pro-inflammatory genes or pro-inflammatory cytokines. And we know also that there's things happening in the brain. We know now that certain circumstances and experiences promote neurogenesis. It promotes the growth and the development of new neural pathways, which are so important for brain health, and can be so important for people who are trying to overcome an adverse childhood event or overcome a traumatic event. We know that there's things happening in the body. So we know now that this nerve, the vagus nerve, right? It's a cranial nerve, but it impacts and innervates every single organ in our body. And it is directly responsible and has a direct impact on whether we're living in a flight or fight situation or whether we're living in a relaxed situation inside of our bodies. And the cool thing about it is that we have the control to change that. So many people, especially during the pandemic, we learned what real stress is like, what it's like to be disconnected from the world. And we realized that being online is not the same as being in person for our mental health, because there are real things that happen. And there's real things that happen when we're connected to nature that are measurable inside of our body. Our heart rate variability. So, the rate, when we breathe in, our heart rate is faster. When we exhale, our heart rate is slower. So that's heart rate variability, right? The number of beats. And the vagus nerve is responsible for that. And we know that when we get with a horse, there's nervousness, right? So
Yes.
all these hormones are circulating through our body. It's not really about flight or fight, but it's certainly an uptick in the nervous system where we're still kind of nervous. We're feeling that tingling, that anxiety. But then we
Especially
learn
around a horse you don't know.
exactly. And what does the horse do? The horse reacts to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're like instant biofeedback. So we learn, and our clients learn really fast, that if they just take a breath, they physically take a step out of the space, and sometimes they do this unconsciously, and sometimes as a facilitator we can help support that, then all of a sudden they see a change in the horse. They go, oh, if I just take a breath and calm myself down, the horse takes their cue from me. And they learn that that also translates to people, especially those people who've had trauma, and they get triggered, and that sends immediately that energy up. But if they can learn that, you know what, the energy is one thing, that is a physiological response happening in the body. And if you understand it, it's not as scary. And then if you understand too that it's humans who attach the emotion to that feeling, and that is usually fear. And it's, those same feelings of loss of control and vulnerability that are associated with a trauma. And if they can separate those out and they can learn how to reduce those physical feelings, again, that's where counselors are great at helping them to process the emotions. So again, the idea is that there's really good science happening, an impact physiologically on our body. If we can lower our energy, that has an impact on our relationships and our social development. we know we need to be connected physically. And then we also know that, again, the horses are really good biofeedback. So if we're still amped up and we're trying to look calm on the outside, the horse is like, yeah, no, I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
And they still react. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm working on, is to really try and help to define physiologically what's happening in the body, what's happening in the brain, what's happening to the breath and the heart rate variability, but also capturing the participant's perspective. Yeah, in the applied ecopsychology, we call that the greatest trustable truth. The greatest trustable truth is yours.
Uh-huh.
Your
That's great.
experience is your truth.
True.
And so, we don't need to measure that. We just need
Uh-huh.
to document it. If they say that they had a change, you know what? That's what matters.
Right.
Not that I
Yeah.
can quantify it, but capturing those stories. So anyway, yes, that's what I'm working on.
Very fascinating. And I love how you're talking about the genomics. Is that the right word for it?
Mhm.
So to the cellular level, the impact that has. That's pretty fascinating.
So we can take, blood work from somebody beforehand and then blood work afterwards, and we can actually measure, how their DNA has changed. And we can look at what things have been turned on and what things have been turned off. And so, part of the idea is that there are certain things that are turned on for people who are dealing with chronic stress and chronic trauma and chronic traumatic responses in the body. And, that cortisol that's continually circulating and never gets turned off, that adrenal fatigue that people talk about. Yeah, there's something that changes in your DNA and you're more susceptible and at risk to inflammatory diseases and other diseases. And I think, again, if we learn how to change that and we know that the horses can be effective in that, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then I'm curious if there's an interconnectivity relationship back to the horse, if the horse is also experiencing that similar mirrored effect of change. I'm wondering how stress impacts horses' DNA too, and if the work with humans has that feedback loop, I guess, where they help us, so we help them to a certain degree. When you're in that, I call it like resonance, but you're just like in that state of healing, which is very equal, like the great equalizer in a way. I'm wondering if that impacts them on a cellular level too.
And people are starting to really examine that. So there are people who have been doing blood draws on both the human and the horse to see if there's changes there in cortisol levels. Some people are using the heart rate variability monitors on both the human and the horse. And our science is getting more sophisticated that we can measure those things. And again, there's so much that we still could explore. It's like if every single one of us, the science geeks, scientists, and and horse people got together and every single one of us did a different study, we still would not begin to wrap our hands around what's happening during that relationship and how much of it is reciprocal and what is happening within the horse while what's happening into the humans. There's, like I said, there's so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so is this work tied into the breath, body, brain program that you're working on at Strides of Success?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what I wanted to do, the more I worked with the people and the horses, I wanted to isolate simple exercises, because one of the pieces of feedback, especially when working with the veterans, was how do I replicate these experiences and feelings at home? What are the hard skills that we're teaching people that when they leave the barn, they can experience those same moments of peace and connection? So I'm interested too in that moment. Especially if you've ever done this work, you can relate to this. There are moments when you're working with a client and they connect, and all of a sudden the energy bottoms out. It's like, I call it a whoosh moment, because I feel like all the air just goes still and quiet. and you don't want to move and you don't want to say anything and you don't want to breathe because you know something special is happening in that moment. And that is the moment of real connection, when somebody lets their guard down and the horse accepts and trusts them enough to truly connect. So, their heart rates will sync up, the breathing syncs up, the mirror neurons begin to fire, the oxytocin is released, and all that cascade happens. And I wanted to kind of really study what happens in that moment. And that's kind of where breath, body, brain came from, because there's a certain element of breath work that happens that triggers something in the brain, that triggers something in the body, that triggers something in the breath, that triggers something back to the brain. And it's like this kind of feedback loop that happens. And if we can teach people how to recreate that moment, the cool thing about, so we know that trauma experiences are stored in the amygdala and in the areas where they remain very, very vivid in the brain. That's why people have sensory experiences when they recall a traumatic memory. We also are beginning to learn that these really cool moments of connection and pure joy and bliss, those are stored in the same place as well. And when people recall those moments, they experience the same physiological sensations. They sometimes can close their eyes and they can hear, they can smell everything that was going on during that moment, because it was so special. So when they recall it, just like when you recall that traumatic memory, a physiological thing begins to happen, right? You begin to feel stress and you begin to go into flight or fight. The antithesis happens with those connected moments, that your body begins to experience the relaxation, that shift from the sympathetic nervous system back to a parasympathetic nervous system dominant state. And if we can capture that and isolate that, then we can teach it to the client, we can teach it to facilitators, and we can help them create opportunities. So you can't make that moment happen, right? It just, all the conditions have to be right. But we can create a situation where it's more likely to happen. So like, what does the facilitator need to be doing? What's the optimal arena? What's the optimal horse? What's the optimal just situation that somebody could have that experience? And then breath, body, brain too is about teaching them those skills that they can then go home. When they start to amp up a little bit, they've got cues that will cue them. Okay, I need to do this. They know that it's not going to happen right away. Because when somebody's having an anxiety attack, got to slow down. You got to slow your breathing, take a deep breath. And then the person having an anxiety attack looks at you and tells you, shut up.
Right.
Right. So they learn that it takes time, and they learn that it's not instant, but then they learn this is just a physiological response. They begin to separate out the emotion, and then they learn, okay, I can do these exercises that work for me. I can recall these moments that I've had with the horse, and I can bring myself back to peace. That's the definition of resilience, right? So anyway, long explanation of what the breath, body, brain is.
That's been great. Thank you for explaining all of that. And it's great work that you're doing and very much needed. And I do think that it would be something so valuable for our field to be able to have that available for other practitioners to be able to work with clients and horses on. And are you working towards that? Are you working on certifications for providers kind of doing this work? Do you mind sharing about that?
Oh, sure. So I have created a website that's breathbodybrain.net, and I have part of that certification done. That's up and available for people. Again, I wanted to create something that you don't necessarily have to have the horse, that you can teach them irregardless of their situation, these particular things. these exercises of grounding, of breath work, and of kind of what they call flow triggers. And it's all available on that website, and it's designed for practitioners as well as just anybody who wants to really work on that part of their life. So we spend some time going over the science, we get that out of the way first, and then we get to the nuts and bolts so that they're walking away with real tangible exercises and supports that help them to create habits. We know that half the battle is remembering to do it, right? When you teach somebody that skill, sometimes they get overwhelmed by an experience and they forget until later. And they're like, oh, well, somebody taught me how to do something about that, and I kind of forgot to do it. Well, that's because your thinking brain went offline during that experience and you don't remember. So what I also wanted to do was provide an opportunity for people to develop that habit. And so that's also a very big part of the breath, body, brain training. At the end of that, you do get a certificate. And then there is also a breath, body, brain facilitator training. And there's also group coaching available. And then I have another separate module that isn't up yet. It's almost done, where for people who work with horses or in animal assisted work or nature-based therapies, how to apply it.
Excellent. Wonderful. So if we have listeners today that would like to try this or sign up and become certified in breath, body, brain, you said they could go to breathbodybrain.net, or
Yep,
do you have, or what may be a good contact information for you too?
Anybody can reach me by email, and that is equinecoach@gmail.com, EQUINE coach@gmail. And I'm also happy to offer a discount code to your listeners.
Awesome.
And so the discount code is Dr. Rebecca, all one word.
Yeah, I love it. Sign me up.
Yeah,
after this call.
Right? No period, just Dr. Rebecca. And I'm happy to give them 10% off the cost of the program. And since it's new, I'm still running what I call my founders special. And so they'll get 10% off.
Awesome. Wonderful. Listeners, you hear that. You better go sign up right now and you will get a discount code using my name, Dr. Rebecca, 10% off of this amazing program that sounds like it will be beneficial for you and your own work and what you're needing in your life, but also when you've mastered that, being able to help other people.
Yeah, and if you're a rider, if you're working with horses and you can learn how to really shift your body, it changes everything in the relationship between you and your horse, because you learn how to feel more than think.
That's wonderful.
That's kind of a fun thing.
Yes. Then anything else in that area for either the work you're doing at Breath, Body, Brain, Strides for Success you would like to share that you haven't shared yet?
Yeah, and we have all kinds of training programs. We've talked about before that this industry can be a little difficult trying to find a direct pathway towards credentialing and training. Debbie and I are excited that we're working on a project with PATH International for credentialing and equine-assisted learning. We also offer a horsework facilitator training program through, if you go to strides2success.org, and that's strides2success.org, you can find out information. We have a ton of professional development workshops and curriculum training. We've been building our library of curriculum. We're currently selling 12 different curriculum for veterans, for schools, for literacy, whatever it might be. And we're happy that we're able to share those on our store. And the horsework training. We also have yoga on horseback. My book is currently available as a download on Amazon as an ebook, and that is Equio, EQUIYO. And Equio is a book about mounted yoga and how you can practice yoga with your horse to achieve that same kind of breath, body, brain. And eventually I will get to a second book about that one. Right?
The
I know,
combo of
there's so
the
much
two.
to talk about.
Right. Well, it sounds like you guys are doing amazing work and offering so many gifts and blessings to this field. Provide how to's, how to do something. But then also sounds like you guys are also thorough in providing the why, why this may work from a science standpoint, which is important, right? Because I think people worry sometimes that the field could be too woo-woo-y or fluffy, which it can be, at times. But sometimes people want to know the why. You're like, why is this working? And the more that we know about science and can measure what's happening, the more we can try to explain that. And then the next is being the creative part about creating, steps and protocols that can be replicable, that are going to hopefully be as effective as possible for what we're hoping the outcome would be, which definitely sounds like well-being,
Mm-hmm.
right? Balance, self-growth, personal development,
Yes.
connection, all the good stuff.
Just as a point of reference, as a resource, in the Recreation Therapy Journal, we're publishing 3 articles on a project we did in Serbia and here in the United States for children with autism. And we're actually publishing the protocol in the journal article. So it's not something that people have to buy, it's there. And we're making the curriculum that we used, which was called Galloping Towards Success. We're also making that available. And it's for use with low functioning autism. So if people are interested, they can find that through the Journal of Recreation Therapy and look for those articles on autism protocols.
How cool is that? So reaching internationally.
Yes.
The national communities. You go, girl. I love it. Wonderful. And so I'm curious, what do you think now that you are where you're at now with all your years of experience that have led you to this point and all that's happening now in the present moment in the field of equine-assisted learning, growth, coaching, spiritual development, all of those things? What are your thoughts about some of the next steps for the growth of this industry of equine and human services and assisted learning? Where do you see that going in the next year, 5 years from now?
So, I think one, you'll start to see new organizations emerge where people begin to just gather together around their specialties and begin to organize into professional organizations. So I think you'll start to see that. You'll start to see more training programs that are accredited and not, and where there becomes a little bit more of a standard for those who offer training. I think you'll start to see some more standardization and some requirements for that. I don't necessarily want to call it regulation, but that's not necessarily a bad word because there is very little regulation right now. But I also think that you'll start to see, like I said, more really good training and some standardization and some standards that are set for training. And I certainly hope so. And of course, seeing more opportunity for continuing education, more variety as people begin to explore and they pair their personal experience with opportunities. You'll see more opportunities online. We specialize at Strides and we have been for the past 15 years on online education. And there is a way to bring information to the human online, but we cannot teach people how to be facilitators online. That is we can't call it an experiential approach and then teach it without the experiential part. I think you'll start to see a lot more hybrid. So opportunity to learn more online, and then paired with some in-person experiences. But I think that we'll start to learn so much more and learn that there is a lot of depth to this work that takes time. All of us who want to do this, it's because we had a really good experience with a horse, something that changed us. And we want to share that with other people. And I think more people who experience that, you'll start to see it grow and people become more invested in the evidence and hopefully see again, more professionals who are making a really good living doing this work.
That'd be great.
Right? I know.
You and I included.
Yes. Hey, it's not
Let's
easy.
make this a 3-figure profession, yes?
Wouldn't that be amazing? We'd
Especially
be
because
able to
horses cost
pay
so
for
much
it.
money, right? I mean, that's nice
I
to
know,
have.
right?
Nice to have a large number or statement on my bank account, but at the same time, it would be so great to be sustainable.
Right? We tend to spend a lot more money on our horses than we do ourselves.
Yes.
I think that's the nature. But what about you? I'm interested in what you kind of see. What do you think that future will
Yes,
be
absolutely. Well, what I have noticed is there's a big rise in competency. People trying to be a lot more accountable, people making sure that there's more ethics that are
like?
really being spoken about is what I'm noticing. And like definitely making sure that the horse is treated with a way of being able to say no if they
Mm-hmm.
wanted to. And so being a lot more equine centered or horse centered, I noticed that. And it does sound like, I mean, there were, with a lot of this growth that's happened since the 90s, arguably, people start out, they create an idea, and then they create a faction, right? And there's like all these different factions. And then, of course, there's a war, right? A civil war, essentially. I'm getting really dramatic here, so bear with me. But, it's like, mine's better than yours, or this approach sucks, or oh my gosh, there's risk to this one. And, and what's your proof in that? So that we had some of that, little growling and stuff with each other, I think, with different areas and philosophies and approaches of working with horses and people, right? And then you have this whole thing about terminology. Like, what is it that we're saying that we're doing? What are the key words? And people, we put a lot of meaning on words, and we get offended when the words change and we don't agree with it, right? So at first you get very attached to the word equine facilitated psychotherapy because
Yep.
that's what I identified with, right? That's what that means. That's what Barbara Rector came up with, right? With equine facilitated mental health and learning. It's facilitated. And then you have no, it's assisted. It's equine assisted learning and development. And so it requires us to have to come out of our schemas, our mental blocks of organizing this information, and emotional meaning and attachment we make to these words, and be open and to a word that now has a new meaning that we feel comfortable saying. So, because I think there's like 45 words that describe what we're doing: equine, horse, before it, assisted, facilitated, interactive, and then whatever it is, whether it's therapy, psychotherapy, learning, right? There's so many fillers. And part of it, I think, is just the uniqueness and the breadth of what people are doing, right? And how you have some people coming up with these things and these words. And so now it's a matter of taking all these words and condensing it into the keywords that will help one not I say like normal people, but but like audience, like people that aren't necessarily in the field, but they hear that and they might know what that means.
Yeah.
Right. So people that
Horses
are in the
aren't normal. We
field, are
know
in the
that.
club, with our horse club jackets on, that
Yeah.
that oh yeah, I know what that is. I don't need a definition for that, right? But other people are like, what is that? Some people don't even know what equine means. They're like, it's a horse. It's like canine or a feline, and they're like, oh, you're like, you didn't know that? you not
Oh my
take
God.
bio
Every
101? But
right. Whenever I give out my email address, I know when I'm talking to a horse person because they know what equine means. They're like, oh my God, are you a horse person? Everybody else is like, equine?
yeah,
Like, first of all, I know you're not a
equine.
horse person. Yes. That
Totally,
was my
right? Yes.
that's my test.
Yes, so it requires a little humility and openness that people don't know, right? So it
Right.
requires more effort to explain in kind ways. And so I think, having common terminology is important just to be able to say what we do, and most people can go, okay. And then for science, it's so important because your keywords mean something, right? So everything in your research question has to mean something, and
Yes.
it's going to be part of what you're doing. So you have to have clear definitions, clear variables, it just has to be clear and concise and neat, so to speak. And so I think that part goes into the tradition of science research. So when you look up a keyword, it's going to match all the other ones.
Yep.
But we have to agree on the definition of that keyword and what that means.
And I think the
And yeah.
consensus document did some of that. So if people are looking for, you know, a resource, again, that would be good to help with that. There is a consensus document that was written by people from the different organizations, and if they look up, I think it's terminology and consensus in equine-assisted services, and if they look that up, then that would give them some of it. Also, and again, they worked really hard and took several years to try and come to an agreement. And of course, they know it's not set in stone. It's going to continue to evolve as our understanding does. On the PATH International website, and I'm happy to share it with anybody else who needs it, there are operating guidelines and competencies. And I think the competencies are a really good resource that if you're looking for training, go to those competencies and see if the training fits those. Are you getting what you need to be, a competent facilitator? So those are some other resources.
Definitely. And I know Dr. McKissock and I have been saying PATH International, but for those who don't know what that means, it stands for the Professional Association of Therapeutic Horsemanship International. It's one of the largest certifying and competency training organizations in the United States and nationally for therapeutic riding, primarily, which is horseback riding for patients with disabilities. But they've also expanded it to include so many other things, including recognition of equine assisted mental health. Now we've changed that to equine assisted services. And also is now finally opening up the door to let in EAL. So, I mean, it kind of already did have EAL, but I think it did feel like for EAL people, you guys were on the fringe. We're not fully part of the club. So there's just, so that's PATH International. They used to be called NARA, and they've been around since 1969. But they are well known for their safety and standards. To become a certified therapeutic riding instructor with them was like the longest, most crazy, enduring process ever. And I almost quit like so many times, like, I don't want to do this. But it's understandable. They definitely put you through the rigors of it, and ensure that, to have that certification, that it does allow you to be qualified to do this work, and especially doing it mounted with your riding. So, because that brings a whole nother level of risk than just not riding unmounted.
And but I wanted to bring up just one point as you were talking about just this, wild, wild west of our industry as everybody's trying to help come to an agreement. The one thing that we need to focus on is that we're all here for the same reason. We're all here to bring humans and horses together for a benefit to both, a mutual benefit. And I think when we focus in on that and we kind of just let the other stuff go, then we can kind of work together and come together on that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you said that, because that's where I feel like after we got to factions and, kind of little war camps and, I think we're now doing that. I think it's coming into this collective of, oh, let me share my resources with you and let's barter and let's get along. It's a lot more kumbaya-y.
It's getting there, right?
It's getting there. But I understand. Right? You create an idea and you're proud of it. There's ego to it, and you want to make money or you want to have notoriety. Right. So I get it, and there's still going to be that happening, right? But I think it's a matter of still having humility that yours is not the best and the only idea. It's part of it, and you're not reinventing the wheel. You're just helping to drive it, right, in a way that we all agree in the same direction.
Yeah, because nothing that I've come up with is an original idea. It came from my noggin, came from my head, but it came from conversations with other people and, subconsciously and consciously taking in information from these amazing other scientists and professionals in this industry. And it's like, that's how the ideas are formed. It became Breath, Body, Brain, honestly, just because I had to get a website for it and I had to come up with a domain and make it something that was easy to remember for myself when I'm teaching it. so that I don't get like all ADD and start going off on a tangent. I have something concrete to follow. But I think that you're right. A lot of it has to do with that branding and that wanting to come up with something unique. But in the end, it's all the same. It's kind of just a different, package with a little bit of a different bow. But I like the idea of what you said. We're not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but we're all driving it forward. I like that.
Yes, yes. So I know we're almost done with our call today, but I have one more question. It's the question of the century. And the question that is so fascinating, I think, to the work that you and I do is, why horses?
Oh my God, you're bringing back a little bit of trauma for me.
What is it about them that works or think there may not work in either equine-assisted mental health or equine-assisted learning, coaching, growth?
So, again, having worked with lots of different species, when I did my master's thesis, it was funny because it wasn't Dr. Beck. It was, I think his name is Dr. Pager, and he is an ethics teacher, and that's what he taught. And he said to me, he's like, so you didn't say in your thesis about why I couldn't substitute a dog and get the same results. So I actually had to go back and rewrite my thesis and add another chapter to it. So this is part of that this is my motivation. I want to answer that question. There is something, and I'll try to give you as short of an answer as I can, because this is a whole other podcast.
Well, we could do it part 2.
Right? We definitely need to do part 2 because this is probably my favorite question. And this is where we get into the really juicy stuff. There is something about the predator-prey dynamic, but not because humans are the predators and horses are the prey. It's because we are both, and they are both. There are instances where horses are not prey. They can defend themselves and they can kill us if they want to in defense of themselves. Humans are also not all predators. We are also prey, and prey to our own species, right? Which is different. Horses, for whatever reason, they don't need us to survive, but they choose to be in relationship. They choose to be dependent. I think there's a choice there, and I don't know what it is. I don't think it's a black and white. Yes, they choose. No, they don't. But I think that there's something there that we could learn into why horses choose not to kill us. Why are they in relationship? Why do they let us ride them? Why do they let us put these metal things in their mouth and race them around a track? And, what is it about from their perspective, why they let us do this? So I think there is something in that relationship, because it's different than the dolphins. With the dolphins, they were much more independent. They were much more like, whatever. I want to interact because I want to interact. Horses are much more, and there's something different about that relationship, and I can't tell you what it is. With horses, again, or with dogs, there is something different. The dogs are much more of a companion. There's a different relationship than with the horses. I had a really unique experience when I was on Ariana Strozzi's ranch. The horse that I chose to work with was the alpha mare. Super shocking. Didn't know that when I chose her, but I chose her because she was really, really pretty. And I walked into the round pen with her. And yeah, there were some really cool things that happened. There was an eagle and a hawk that were circling each other and calling out to each other.
Wow.
In the canyon just above us. And I was wearing a hat, and it was my my own horse hat. And this mare walked over, and she took my hat off my head and she stomped on it. She stomped on it. She walked and she kind of pawed at it.
Gosh.
And
What
she
a
walked
nice
over.
mare.
I know, right? And then she walked over to Ariana and promptly started almost knocking Ariana off of the ledge because they were sitting on the side of the round pen, and just knocked her almost over.
Oh
And
my.
I thought, and in that moment, I was like, okay, I've never had that kind of experience with any other animal, with cows or chickens or birds of prey even. I worked with Andean condors and other birds of prey, not with the dolphins, not with anything. And that was pretty cool. So I think when there's a vulnerability that happens in that moment, I think there's something about the horse and the way that they interact with humans that's different. I don't know what it is, but I do know that horses are better at reading body language than we are. And they're more attuned to body language. And they can see so much more. They look at our language and go, God, you guys are simple. We can translate your stuff, no problem. And whereas we're taking so long to try and decode and interpret what they're doing, they've got us pegged. I don't know what necessarily that mare's message to me was, but in that moment, I definitely felt something, a calling, something about the fact that my job wasn't done and that maybe I was not focusing on the right thing and that maybe my ADD and working so many jobs was probably not the best idea and that I needed to focus. Ariana's question to me was, do you wear too many hats? And I was like, oh,
That's a
knife in
great
the heart,
question.
that meant something, right?
Yeah.
And it stuck with me. So something about that experience. I also think there's something about the vulnerability, this again, that happens because horses are big. I think they capture our attention. There's something that we are in awe about them, their strength and their beauty and their social dynamic is something we want. I also, and so there's many of those factors. There's a quote, and I wish I had it in front of me, from Adele von McCormick's book, Horse Sense for the Human Heart, where they talk about the fact that horses quickly anchor us and they force us to face our existential truths of life and death. And I think there's something very true about that vulnerability, and it opens the door. And then the fact that they can, they know what we're thinking, and even if we can't admit it, and they're responding to that. And so, like I said, they're the instant biofeedback. And when we are centered, when we are present, and when we are relaxed, they come and they want to interact with us. And the minute we get in our heads again, they're like, yep, I'm out here. I'm going to go over here and graze. When you're ready, when you come back, let me know. Right. And so there's something about that too, but we don't have that question answered yet. But I think we're going to get there. And I know that there's something about those pieces that's different. I would love to do a large scale study of the same protocol with lots of different species just to see what the difference would be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yes, I think that would be a fair study too, because I mean, I know I get biased with the horses, but because the horses are excellent, but of course there is something about the human animal bond with a variety of species and what that looks like, whether it's domesticated or companion animals or wild animals. So there is an interesting dynamic that happens and how it influences us and how we influence them. But I think you did a great job answering that question on the fly. So thank you so much for describing that, and I really enjoyed what you shared, and I think it makes sense from all the various multifaceted areas that horses may why it may work in this field. Before we end today, any closing thoughts or comments before we end our call today?
No, I just totally enjoyed this. I always love talking with you, and I love to have these conversations because it's in these conversations that we're going to find that deeper meaning that we're all looking for in this work. Whether, I think you and I agree on a lot of stuff, but I love having conversations with people where we don't agree also, and just digging in. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to just expound, right?
You're welcome. Well, I am an admirer and a big fan of you and your work. And I would like to also thank our listeners for being present with us today. If you would like to learn more about equine-assisted mental health treatments and research or equine-assisted learning, or about my nonprofit, Eudaimonia Equine Connections, Inc., and the programs we're offering, please visit our website at www.equineconnections.org. Once again, that was www.equineconnections.org. Thank you all for being here today. May the force of the horse be with you, and I hope you all have a blessed day.
If you enjoyed this episode, please click to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. And for all the show's notes and links, visit our website at equineconnections.org. For additional information, or if you would like to support this podcast show or Eudaimonia Equine Connections nonprofit programs with donations or sponsorship, or would like to be a featured guest on Dr. Rebecca's Let's Talk Horses, May the Force of the Horse Be With You podcast show, then please visit our website or email at info@equineconnections.org. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to have you here with us next time.